The crowded corner. The steady drumming of rain against the windows of Bookmark Haven created a soothing rhythm that Eliza Bennett had grown to love over the 7 years she'd owned the small bookstore. Located on a quiet street corner in Portland, the shop was her sanctuary, a place where stories lived between weathered pages and new adventures waited on freshly stocked shelves. Tonight, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Eliza sat perched on her wooden stool behind the counter, her chestnut hair tied in a loose bun, wire-framed glasses sliding down her nose as she catalogued new arrivals. At 32, she had built this life deliberately, choosing books over the corporate law career her parents had envisioned for her. The bell above the door chimed, and a gust of rain-scented air swept through the shop. A tall man rushed in, shaking water from his dark coat. His broad shoulders hunched slightly as he closed a sleek black umbrella. "Quite the storm out there," Eliza offered with a gentle smile. The man looked up, raindrops clinging to his dark, slightly disheveled hair. His eyes, a deep, thoughtful green, met hers with surprising warmth. "It came out of nowhere," he replied, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "I hope you don't mind me taking refuge. I was walking to my hotel when the sky opened up." "That's what bookshops are for," Eliza said. "Refuge from all kinds of storms." Something in her words made him pause, his expression softening. "I haven't been in a place like this in years," he admitted, glancing around at the floor-to-ceiling shelves. "I forgot how they feel, and how do they feel?" she asked, curious despite herself. "Like time slows down?" He moved deeper into the store, running his fingers along book spines. "I'm Julian, by the way." "Eliza, this is my shop." Julian nodded appreciatively. "You've created something special here." For the next hour, while rain pounded against the windows, Julian wandered through the narrow aisles. Occasionally, he would pull out a book, read a few lines, and return it with careful precision. Eliza found herself watching him between helping the few other customers who had braved the storm. There was something different about him. Not just his tailored clothes or the expensive watch peeking from beneath his cuff. It was the way he handled each book with reverence, the thoughtful concentration in his eyes as he read. As closing time approached and the rain subsided, Julian appeared at the counter with a weathered copy of The Architecture of Happiness. "Found something that speaks to you?" Eliza asked, taking the book. "It's an old friend," he replied. "I've read it many times, but never owned a copy." Their fingers brushed as she handed him his change, a small moment that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. "Will you be in Portland long?" The question surprised her even as she asked it. Julian hesitated before answering. "A few weeks. I'm working on a project nearby." "Well," Eliza said, handing him his wrapped purchase, "we're open every day except Mondays." His smile reached his eyes this time. "I'll remember that." As Julian stepped back into the damp evening, book tucked carefully inside his coat, Eliza had the strangest feeling that something important had just happened. Like the opening chapter of a story she hadn't realized she'd begun reading. Paper. Conversations. 3 days passed before Julian returned to Bookmark Haven. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows as he entered, this time without the drama of a thunderstorm. Eliza was helping an elderly woman find a gift for her granddaughter, but she noticed him immediately, the architect with thoughtful eyes who now moved through her shop. With quiet familiarity, "You came back," she said when they finally stood face to face by the classics section. Julian's smile was softer than she remembered. "I finished my book and needed another." His fingers traced the spine of a collection of Keats' poetry. "Plus, I discovered your coffee is far better than what my hotel serves." Over the next 2 weeks, Julian established a routine. He would arrive in the late afternoon, select a book, and settle into the worn leather armchair in the corner. Sometimes he would sketch in a small black notebook, lines forming with precision beneath his pen. Other times he would simply read, occasionally glancing up to find Eliza watching him. One rainy Tuesday, the shop nearly empty as evening approached, Julian approached the counter with a collection of letters by Vincent van Gogh. "Have you read these?" he asked. Eliza nodded. "Many times. They break my heart a little each time." "That's exactly it," Julian replied, something flickering in his expression, beauty and sadness intertwined. Before leaving that evening, Julian handed her a small paper bookmark. On it, he'd sketched the interior of her bookstore, capturing the warm glow of the reading lamps and the comforting disorder of well-loved books. For the shop owner who provides refuge, he'd written an elegant script. The next morning, Eliza found a book on her doorstep, a rare edition of architectural sketches from the 1800s. Inside, a folded note. For someone who understands the value of spaces that tell stories. Their pattern evolved. Julian would leave books with notes. Eliza would respond with her own discoveries. Between the pages of Letters to a Young Poet, she tucked a pressed flower and a line about courage. In return, tucked inside The Secret Garden, she found a perfect sketch of her hands as she shelved books, with a note. The careful curator of dreams and histories. They spoke in the language of literature, references and quotations becoming their private code. When customers weren't around, they debated the merits of magical realism or the decline of the epistolary novel. Eliza found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she cared to admit. "What exactly is your project here?" she finally asked one evening as they closed the shop together, something that had somehow become natural. Julian hesitated. "A community center. Something different from my usual work." "And what is your usual work?" His smile turned enigmatic. "Buildings that make people look up and wonder." One night after closing, they walked to a nearby cafe. Over steaming mugs of chai, Julian told her about growing up in London with a mathematician father and artist mother, about studying at Cambridge, about his passion for creating spaces that honored both beauty and function. He asked about her journey from law school dropout to bookstore owner, listening intently as she described finding purpose among stories when her own path seemed uncertain. What Julian didn't mention was the international acclaim, the magazine covers, the celebrity clients. He didn't tell her about the pressure of maintaining a reputation built on innovation, or the loneliness of success. For now, he was simply a man who loved books and beautiful spaces, who found peace in a cluttered bookshop with a woman who saw the world through stories. On his 15th visit, Julian left a copy of Pride and Prejudice with a single line highlighted, "I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun." Beneath it, he'd written, "Dinner tomorrow? 7 p.m.? Eliza closed the book, heart beating faster than she wanted to acknowledge. She wrote her answer on a scrap of paper and slipped it into Persuasion, which he'd been eyeing earlier. "Yes, but only if you promise to tell me your full story." Blueprint Revelations. The Italian restaurant Julian selected was small and unassuming, tucked away on a side street lined with flowering plum trees. Inside, copper pans hung from exposed beams, and the aroma of garlic and fresh bread created an atmosphere of immediate comfort. The hostess led them to a corner table partially hidden behind a brick column, where candles flickered in blue glass holders. Julian pulled out Eliza's chair, his hand briefly touching her shoulder, a gesture so slight yet somehow electric. In the warm light, he looked different than he did in her bookstore. More relaxed, perhaps, but also more substantial. Less like a character from her beloved novels and more like someone with depth and complexity she had yet to discover. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes taking in her emerald dress, the one she'd impulsively purchased years ago and rarely found occasion to wear. "You clean up rather well yourself," she replied, noticing how his charcoal suit fit his frame with a precision that suggested it wasn't off the rack. They ordered wine, then pasta dishes with names Eliza couldn't pronounce. Their conversation flowed easily, as it always did between shelves of books, but here it felt different, more intentional. Julian spoke of his travels, of buildings that had moved him to tears in Barcelona and Kyoto. Eliza shared childhood stories of reading under blankets with a flashlight, of finding herself in fictional characters when real life felt too constricting. "You still haven't told me your full story," Eliza said as their desserts arrived. "You promised." A shadow passed across Julian's face. "I've enjoyed being just Julian here." "With you, as opposed to?" His response was interrupted by a young couple approaching their table, excitement evident in their expressions. "I'm so sorry to intrude," the woman said, clutching her partner's arm. "But are you Julian Reed, the architect who designed the Horizon Tower in Singapore?" Julian's smile remained in place, but Eliza saw something close behind his eyes. "I am," he acknowledged with a gracious nod. "Your work is incredible. We're both architecture students, and your ecological approach to urban design is revolutionary." The man extended his hand. Would you mind if we took a quick photo? Julian glanced at Eliza apologetically before standing to oblige the couple. As they thanked him profusely and returned to their table, Eliza's mind raced. Julian Reed. The name suddenly connected with images she'd seen in magazines, with buildings that had been celebrated for redefining modern architecture. Julian Reed, whose private island residence for a tech billionaire had been featured in Architectural Digest last year. When he sat back down, the air between them had changed. So, Eliza said, her voice carefully neutral. Julian Reed. He nodded, reaching for his wine glass. I was going to tell you tonight. Were you? She studied his face, searching for the man she thought she knew. 3 weeks of conversations, Julian. Notes hidden in books. Sketches and shared stories. You never thought to mention that you're essentially architectural royalty? Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently? His question wasn't defensive, but genuinely uncertain. Everyone does. That should have been my choice, Eliza replied. Not yours to make for me. The waiter arrived with their check, which Julian quickly handled. Outside the restaurant, Portland's evening had turned cool, stars visible between scattered clouds. They walked in silence for several blocks, the weight of unspoken words between them. My entire life is public, Julian finally said as they approached her bookstore. My designs, my process, even my relationships get dissected in the design world. When I walked into your shop that rainy day, you looked at me and just saw a person seeking shelter. Do you know how rare that is? Eliza stopped beneath a street lamp, its glow catching the uncertainty in his expression. I understand wanting privacy, she said, but relationships, even friendships, need honesty. Is that what we have? A friendship? Julian's voice had softened, almost vulnerable. Before Eliza could answer, her phone chimed with a notification. Absently, she glanced at the screen and froze. It was a news alert from an architecture blog she'd subscribed to after their first dinner. Star architect Julian Reed spotted in Portland. Sources confirm he's designing the controversial new Riverside development. Eliza looked up, confusion evident in her expression. The Riverside development? The one that's replacing the historic buildings in the Arts District? The one that's forcing out 5 small businesses, including Ramirez Bookbinding that's been there for 50 years? Julian's face paled. Eliza, it's complicated. Is that your community center? She asked, stepping back. A luxury development that's erasing part of our city's history. The plans include affordable housing and preservation elements that aren't public yet, he started. But Eliza was already shaking her head. I need to go, she said, turning away. I think we both have stories we need to reconsider. Eliza, please, Julian called after her, but she continued walking, her emerald dress disappearing into the evening shadows. Back in her apartment above the bookstore, Eliza paced between bookshelves that lined even her personal space. She pulled up articles about the Riverside development on her tablet, reading about local protests and community concerns. The project was exactly what she had fought against on the Neighborhood Preservation Committee. Corporate interest disguised as progress. How could the man who spoke so reverently about beautiful spaces be the same one designing something that would destroy the character of her beloved city? The Julian who left thoughtful notes in books seemed incompatible with the famous architect whose sleek, modernist designs graced skylines worldwide. Structural integrity. 3 days passed without Julian appearing at Bookmark Haven. Eliza found herself glancing at the door whenever the bell chimed, only to feel a mixture of relief and disappointment when it wasn't him. On the 4th morning, a large envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a complete set of architectural plans for the Riverside development. Not the glossy renderings shown in press releases, but detailed blueprints covered with handwritten notes. Post-it notes marked sections where historical facades would be preserved, where affordable housing units were integrated, where community spaces would connect to existing neighborhood structures. A letter accompanied the plans. Eliza, I've never shown unfinished work to anyone outside my team. These are the actual plans, not what the developers are promoting, but what I've been fighting to implement. The community center isn't a cover story. It's the heart of this project. Though the investors keep trying to minimize it, I should have told you everything from the beginning. You're right about honesty being fundamental. Perhaps I was afraid that if you knew who I was, our conversations would change, that I'd become a persona rather than a person in your eyes. What began between shelves of stories became the most real thing in my life. If you're willing, I'll be at the Old Fitzgerald Theater tomorrow at noon. It's part of the Riverside site. I want to show you what could be possible there. Julian, the next day, against her better judgment, Eliza found herself walking toward the boarded-up theater. Julian was waiting outside, looking tired and uncertain without his usual confidence. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. Inside, the once grand theater was dusty and neglected, but its bones, ornate plasterwork and sweeping arches, remained intact. Julian led her through the space, his voice gaining animation as he described his vision. The restored theater becoming a community arts center, with the adjacent new construction designed to complement rather than overwhelm the historical structures. The developers wanted to demolish everything, he explained, pulling out his sketchbook. "I've been modifying plans, reducing the commercial footprint, fighting to preserve what matters. That's why I've been in Portland so long, not just because of you, though that became the reason I wanted to stay." He showed her revised designs where modern elements embraced rather than erased the neighborhood's character. Eliza saw what he was trying to do, create something that honored the past while building for the future. "Why not tell the public about these changes?" she asked, running her hand along an antique wooden banister. "Corporate clients control the narrative until contracts are finalized," Julian explained. "But I'm presenting these revisions as non-negotiable at tomorrow's board meeting. If they reject them, I walk away from the project. And if walking away means damaging your reputation," Julian's gaze met hers steadily, "then I damage my reputation. Some things matter more." As they stood in a shaft of light streaming through the theater's damaged roof, Eliza realized she was seeing the real Julian Reed, not just the charming man from her bookstore or the famous architect, but someone caught between worlds trying to build something meaningful. "I still wish you had told me sooner," she said. "I know," he replied. "I should have trusted that you would see me, not just my name or work. Will you come to the community forum tomorrow night? The one where they're discussing the development? I'm announcing the revised plans publicly, regardless of what the board says." Bound together, the community center was packed, angry residents filling every seat. Eliza sat near the back, watching Julian stand before the hostile crowd. Gone was his expensive suit, replaced by a simple button-down and jeans, the Julian she had first met in her bookstore. "I understand your concerns," he began, his voice steady despite the tension. "And you're right to be concerned when developers prioritize profit over community." Murmurs rippled through the audience as Julian unveiled his alternative vision, a development that preserved the theater, maintained affordable spaces for local businesses including Ramirez Bookbinding, and incorporated green spaces accessible to all. He explained how he had redesigned the project after spending time in the neighborhood, understanding its rhythms and needs. "This morning, the development board rejected these revisions," Julian announced. "So I resigned from the project." The room erupted in surprised conversations. A local journalist stood up. "You're walking away from a multi-million-dollar commission?" "I'm walking away from a project that doesn't serve this community," Julian corrected. "And I'm pledging my personal resources to help local businesses fight the development as currently proposed." His eyes found Eliza's across the room. She felt something shift inside her, the recognition that he had chosen integrity over success, community over acclaim. After the meeting, they walked along the river, city lights reflecting in the dark water. "What happens now?" Eliza asked professionally. "I'll survive the scandal," Julian smiled ruefully. "Personally? That depends on you." 6 months later, Bookmark Haven had expanded into the adjacent storefront. The new space, with its reading nooks and community meeting area, had been redesigned by a certain architect who now split his time between international projects and a small Portland apartment. Above a bookstore, the Riverside development had been scaled back after community pressure and the withdrawal of investors following Julian's public stance. The historic theater was being restored as an arts center, funded partially by a foundation Julian had established. On a quiet Sunday evening, Eliza closed the shop early. She climbed the stairs to find Julian at their kitchen table, sketching modifications for a sustainable housing project in Detroit. Wrapped packages of books surrounded him, gifts they exchanged still, continuing their tradition of communication through literature. "I found something today," she said, placing a worn copy of The Architecture of Happiness before him, the very book he had purchased on that first rainy evening. Julian opened it to find a note in Eliza's handwriting. To the man who built a home between pages before we had walls, thank you for showing me that the most beautiful structures are the ones we create together. He looked up, eyes bright with emotion. I never expected to find this when I walked into your shop that day. The best stories, Eliza replied. Sitting beside him are the ones we don't see coming. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, the same rhythmic sound that had accompanied their beginning. But now, instead of seeking temporary refuge, they had built something lasting. A life constructed carefully, thoughtfully, one page at a time.